Hello, everyone. I'm Randy Gores. I'm the Director of City Planning, and this is our third meeting for the Palma Ceia Community Plan. With me is Stephen Benson. He is the project manager. Many of you have met with him and talked with him. Tonight's meeting is to present some initial findings from our efforts over the last several months. I'm not going to take very much time. I'm going to turn everything over to Stephen so he can run you through the presentation. We will take questions afterwards. So afterwards, we'll come back. You can just raise your electronic hand or digital hand and we'll recognize you and take your questions at that point. So with that, Stephen, why don't you go ahead and take control.
Great, thank you. So we are here this evening to go over the strategies and solutions that we have developed for the Palma Ceia Neighborhood Commercial District. Just to give you some context and some background for those of you that might be new to this project. The project is focused on the Beta Bay and McDill corridors in the Palma Ceia area on the Inner Bay Peninsula. The district here, the study area is shown here on the screen. Roughly the limits that we're looking at are the Beta Bay corridor, the first block to the north and the first block to the south, roughly from Hyde Avenue on the western edge over to the Solomon Expressway on the eastern edge, and then the Beta Bay corridor, similarly about one block or half a block on either side, McDill from south of Beta Bay up to San Miguel. And to give you a little bit of a background of where we've been and where we're going, the prior meetings that we've had for this project have dealt with the existing conditions and the trends that we're seeing, and really looking at what the data is telling us about the health and the success of the Palma Ceia Commercial District. We looked at population and employment data, as well as economic and some of the development and redevelopment trends. And then we also undertook a couple of different community engagement activities. We held, this is the third virtual meeting we've held so far. We also put out a preliminary survey to get input from residents and business owners in the area. And we received about 190 responses to that survey, which helped us to develop these recommendations. And then we also conducted about 10 focus groups with residents and businesses and property owners along the corridor. And that brings us to the purpose of this meeting, which is to review those key themes and those key issues that arose that we want the plan to be able to address. And then also go over some of our proposed strategies and solutions, actions that we want the plan to recommend to move forward. But before we get into those recommendations, just want to make sure that everyone has access to the project website. It's here posted on the screen, tampa.gov/city-planning/Palma-Ceia. And at the website, you'll be able to review and share materials from the prior meetings that I just spoke about, as well as review and share materials from this meeting, which we will be posting here in a couple of days after today. And then this is really important. We would like for you to complete a survey that will be getting your input on the strategies and the solutions that I'll be presenting to you here on the next round of slides. And that survey is open now on the website, and it will be closing on June 4th. So you'll have about a month to provide input and help us to refine these recommendations and get the plan finalized. So this is the project schedule. We began fall of last year with just initiating the project and with inventorying the existing conditions. We are right now at the strategy development and preparing the report phase. And then after this, once we get into the fall, we're going to move into the actual implementation, where we are going to be managing and monitoring the recommendations as they move toward completion. So just a little bit of background, what we've learned so far. Many of you may be aware that the neighborhood, the Palma Ceia district, was actually, it began development in the 1920s by Thomas Palmer, was the original landowner, and it was a streetcar suburb served by the Ballast Point car that came out of the downtown and West Tampa, Ybor area down and connected to Ballast Point. Here's an image of the intersection of Beta Bay and Bayshore here from the early 20th century. And then here's just some additional photos and documentation to really demonstrate that the district has always been a bit of a mixed use commercial district. It's always been a Main Street district, and it was intended to really have that function, and it's always served that purpose. Some of these buildings are even still in existence today. As far as the actual Palma Ceia neighborhood goes, this is just some images and some examples of the existing residential development. And this is important because we really want to make sure that the future of the commercial district itself complements and supports the vision for the actual residential neighborhood around it. They really should work in harmony and in tandem to achieve a consistent vision. And here's some of the newer townhome development that's gone in. And then here is just an image of the Beta Bay Boulevard corridor itself. This is the segment that we're focusing on. And then an image here of the McDill Avenue section looking north from Beta Bay towards Barcelona Street. Okay, so now getting into strategies and solutions. The first thing that we want to go over is the vision for the Palma Ceia district. It's really important that we have a concise and all-encompassing vision statement that really captures what you and what the rest of the community believe should be the vision for the future. And this is what's going to drive everything else in the plan. So the vision statement that we've developed based upon your input so far is a safe, walkable, connected, thriving, and beautiful Main Street where residents and visitors can gather and interact. And some of the buzzwords that kept coming up throughout the various meetings in the survey were economic prosperity, accessibility, connectivity, walkability, really that kind of Main Street feel, and looking at how to make the district more beautiful and welcoming and a destination. And then this is some of the work that the University of South Florida School of Community Design developed to help us develop a clearer sense of what the vision could be and identify some of the assumptions and the challenges along the corridor in terms of what we think we can potentially accomplish in the future. And all of the University of South Florida presentations and reports are posted on the website. We encourage you to take a look at them and share your feedback on each of those projects. So all of the strategies and solutions that I'm about to present fall under one of 6 key themes. And these are the themes that arose throughout the planning process thus far. The first theme is enhancing the public realm. The second theme is reimagining the actual roadway itself, the Beta Bay roadway and the McDill roadway. The third is looking at how to make the actual infrastructure, not just the road, but anything from stormwater to utilities, making everything to walkways and pathways and bike lanes, to making everything more connected and well organized. That deals with not just filling the obvious gaps in the sidewalk network, but also just taking a look globally at how the district could better connect and better interface with Beta Bay and better connect with the surrounding Palma Ceia neighborhood. The fourth key theme is public safety, mainly focusing on roadway safety and traffic safety. The fifth key theme is urban parking management. And the sixth key theme is land use and community design. This is a summary of all of the recommendations. If you visit the project website, as I mentioned, you'll be able to provide input on each of these individual recommendations that I'm about to go through, and rank the ones that you think are good ideas that we should pursue, so that we know to prioritize those. And the remainder of the presentation will focus on each of these recommendations. So the first theme is enhancing the public realm. recommendation for this is to focus on identifying and developing gateway features in the neighborhood. Here are some examples on the screen of what gateway features, what we mean by gateway feature. You can see the entrance to Davis Islands, entrance to the Hampton Terrace District in Old Seminole Heights. These are some newer gateway features that have been installed in the city, contemporary gateway features. But then we also actually have a legacy and a history of gateway features. You can see there the original entry gate for Parkland Estates. That's a Burgert Brothers photo. Definitely more of a grandiose type of a literal gateway into that neighborhood. And then in Seminole Heights, the bottom left, we see the murals, the murals proliferating throughout the district. That's another example of a potential gateway feature. And then some other examples of gateway features throughout the city and county. But one of the challenges that we have in Palma Ceia is that there aren't really a lot of locations with enough room to install these features. So the murals are obviously an easy one because you can find a vantage point on the side of a building that's visible to people walking and driving by. But generally speaking, these are two locations that we feel like would be good locations to consider for upgrades or enhanced gateway features, simply because of the available right-of-way, the available real estate there to actually put the feature. The image on the right is the intersection of Beta Bay and McDill. There is an existing sculpture there by a renowned artist that we are recommending be relocated and rehabilitated. It's been out there for I think about 10 years, and it's weathered a little bit, and really it's a little out of scale with the size and the available space here. This can be incorporated into another area of the district doesn't require as much room. And another feature can be installed here that could take up and use some more of the space and also be more visible. You can see here just from across the street, you can't even really make out what the sign says or what it is. So maybe something a little bit larger that fits the scale of that space. And then on the image on the left, even though this is actually outside of the study area, this intersection, the intersection of Beta Bay and Bayshore, is of course a really prominent intersection, and really the decision point between the connectivity between the Bayshore Linear Park and the commercial district of Palma Ceia. And so this would be a good location to maybe partner with the Bayshore Gardens Neighborhood Association to develop some wayfinding or some type of a gateway element to draw people into the Palma Ceia district and off of Bayshore and vice versa, to just emphasize that linkage. The next recommendation is to activate the Selman Expressway Underpass. This was something that was raised by a lot of different individuals throughout the planning process. There it is, the location on the map highlighted on the screen. And we see all over the country and all over the world different examples of creative ways to activate urban places, and highway underpasses are one of the places that you see a lot of different creative solutions, from sculptures to active spaces, or with rock climbing and recreational facilities, as well as just general public gathering places with lighting, color, texture, all of the elements that go into creating a plaza or a park can be used to activate this space. Here are some images of the renderings of what that space could potentially look like if it was improved and enhanced. This is the Underpass Plaza concept with the pathway that connects Santiago Street to Beta Bay through the pylons underneath the elevated roadway. And then here's another angle of a similar, the same concept, looking from the other angle. And then this is another concept for the same space that shows how to potentially incorporate a business or an eatery of some kind underneath the overpass. It's a lot of room down there, and this was one of the concepts that was generated by one of our USF students working on this project. The next recommendation is to focus on the CSX corridor as an asset to the community. There are many different options, ways it can be reused. There are only a couple of different freight customers that still are served by trains on this South Tampa spur. And so really making sure that this corridor is preserved so that we can potentially repurpose it in the future. It has been discussed for many years, the viability or the potential for passenger rail service, not just on this segment of CSX rail, but also the other segments throughout the city and the adjacent in Pinellas County, especially the line going up to USF. But another option could potentially be to look at a rail to trail. So the Pinellas Trail over in Pinellas County is obviously, one of the more famous rail to trail corridors. And after many years of developing and building out that trail system, they now see about 20,000 trips per day, 250,000 trips a month on the Pinellas Trail. And that has spurred a lot of redevelopment along those towns that interface with the Pinellas Trail, Dunedin, Safety Harbor, St. Petersburg. So this could be another example of how to leverage that asset and turn it into something that is active and that actually helps the district prosper in the future. Now transitioning to theme number 2. This theme is all about reimagining the actual roadways themselves within the actual right-of-way. This image is an example of what that vision could potentially look like. This was developed by one of the University of South Florida students, and it's a rendering of the Beta Bay. It's Beta Bay facing east towards the Selman. This is the intersection of Beta Bay and McDill, and you can see that they've got, some of these buildings have been redeveloped and brought closer to the street. You can see the roadway has been completely reconfigured, and that there's a lot more actual roadside space and pedestrian environment than there is today by reallocating that available space. Something else you'll notice too is a lot of the greenery that doesn't exist today. There's a lot more of it, the street trees and the landscaping, which is another item that we heard through the public engagement. So the recommendation that we're focusing on here is a pilot project. And this pilot project is a way for us to take a look at what options exist to reconfigure Beta Bay that haven't already been considered, and building out a program where we can test different configurations over the course of 2 months, 6 months, 1 year. And this is really a best practice that was tried in many other different cities. The example on the screen is an example in Orlando of a pilot project that was tested on Curry Ford Road. And that project involved testing a road diet configuration, reducing the number of lanes. But it was tested only for a short time, for a couple of months, and ultimately they actually removed it because it didn't meet what was wanting to be achieved by testing that configuration. So really the point here is to emphasize that we can be nimble and we can test different options through a pilot project. And doesn't have to be one option. We can pick 3 of them and test them out to see if there's a best fit design that is better than what's there now, but that still meets all of the different needs that we have and that we want to see in the future. Again, this would employ treatments that would be temporary and low cost. We wouldn't actually physically change the curb line of the road. It would just be restriping. And we would focus on how to incorporate safety features such as painted curb extensions that could eventually be reconfigured or removed as the pilot project evolves through different scenarios. Moving from the pilot project on to more of the longer term, in the future after the pilot project is done, we would hope to be able to identify a configuration that is the best fit for the Beta Bay corridor, and then go ahead and look at permanently implementing that project. So converting the pilot scenario into a permanent configuration, and doing that by narrowing lane widths, by widening and enhancing some of the existing sidewalks, by actually physically relocating the curbs. When we do that, we can incorporate landscape areas and underground utilities. And then the image that's here on the bottom right just shows one possibility of how that could evolve over time. Again, it's going to depend upon what we test during the pilot project to determine what is the viable solution in the long run. And again, the same concept for the McDill side. looking at converting some of the angle parking to parallel parking, and then using that space to rebalance the pedestrian sidewalks and make them wider, and also create space for landscape zones and for tree wells as well. And this is an example of some of the types of treatments that we can fit if we can focus on a long-term project in the future. This is innovative stormwater treatments, and then different landscaping options that can be incorporated. So the next theme is the theme of resilient and organized infrastructure. This recommendation is to focus on enhancing connectivity to Bayshore. Within the district and within an immediate walking distance, there are actually no parks. There's a couple of parks, but they're really outside of that quarter-mile watershed of the district. And the closest park to the district is actually the Bayshore Boulevard Linear Park. And so we want to try to emphasize that the Palma Ceia district and the Bayshore Linear Park, really, it should be a seamless connection between the two of them. It should be your immediate mental reaction that it's no big deal to walk from Bayshore to Palma Ceia and back and forth, and do so in a comfortable way, in a safe way. And so obviously that involves mitigating the barriers that exist. There are some natural and some man-made barriers. Obviously the rail corridor, but also the Selman is another physical barrier. So we want to try to mitigate that using strategies, like I mentioned earlier, the activating that underpass area, as well as filling actual physical gaps in the sidewalk network, which you see on the bottom left. This is an example of a project that our mobility department is working on to close the sidewalk gap on the south side of Beta Bay between the Selman overpass and Bayshore Boulevard. So chipping away at all these sidewalk gaps and really reinforcing the connectivity to Bayshore is just a critical action. The other connectivity issue that we want to focus on is connectivity to the surrounding neighborhood. There are, again, barriers and critical gaps that exist in that network, and designating the pathways along these side streets that connect the east-west residential streets to Beta Bay itself and to MacDill itself. That needs to be focused on, and we'll be recommending the specific side streets that don't meet that standard and that need to be enhanced as part of the actual report. The third issue under this theme is the utility poles. This was another hot topic that almost everybody brought up, was relocating or undergrounding or figuring out how to move the utility poles out of the sidewalk area. Here are just some examples of locations, the more egregious locations where the utility pole is in the center of the sidewalk, and you can hardly even get a stroller or a cart to kind of navigate that. So this is obviously going to be a costly and a longer term solution, but what we can do now is pull some of that initial information, look at things like potentially a phased approach where first we install the actual conduit underneath the roadway, and then later, once additional funding becomes available, is when we actually convert everybody to underground. Those are some strategies that have been used in other areas of the city, and it helps break up that enormous capital cost up front. Another concern is funding sources. We have to make sure that there's obviously a sustainable funding source to pay for this type of improvement. Looking at very preliminary planning level costs based upon recent similar projects throughout the city, we're estimating that for the MacDill segment from Santiago to San Miguel, which is about 8 blocks, that is about 3,600 feet and will cost between $1.6 and $3.2 million to underground the utility in that area. And then for the Beta Bay segment, which is another 8 blocks from Hyde to Bayshore, about just over 2,000 feet long, that is also a similar cost, 1.6 million to 3.2, somewhere in that range. And so for both corridors, we're looking at about between $3 and $6.4 million to underground, and that would be to fully underground the utilities and remove the poles from the sidewalk area. The fourth theme is all related to public safety, and this on the screen you can see here some of the hot the hot locations where we know there are safety issues that need to be addressed. These are sidewalk gaps. These are areas where there are no ramps for anybody that has mobility challenges and requires the use of a wheelchair, or somebody that is visually impaired. All of these are deficiencies that are affecting safety that need to be corrected. In terms of public safety, speed was mentioned in a lot of the outreach thus far, and not just speeding itself, vehicles exceeding the speed limit, but also the design of the road simply just encouraging speeds that are too high, and looking at lowering that speed limit. The speed limit's been lowered recently within the last several years. It's now 30 miles per hour on the Beta Bay side. But what's important is the sign that I showed in the prior slide, which is the speed feedback sign. I'll show it again so you can see it here. Several of those were installed on Beta Bay back when the road was repaved. And those devices actually record speeds of passing vehicles. And so what we're able to do is take the speed data from those signs and get almost real-time feedback in terms of the speeds that drivers are actually traveling in real time. And what we've discovered is that over 50% of the vehicles traveling on Beta Bay each day are actually exceeding the posted speed limit, which is a significant amount of vehicles exceeding the speed limit. And we know that the ability to survive and to not become injured when you're involved in a crash going 20 miles per hour is much better, and the likelihood that you will be killed is much less than if you're in a crash with a vehicle that's traveling 40 miles per hour and obviously 30 miles per hour as well. The higher the speed, the more severe the crash, and the more likely that there will be injury or death involved. And so speed is a very serious issue, and is really the paramount concept behind Vision Zero, which is the city's program to eliminate fatalities and severe injuries on our roadways. So to achieve this issue of focusing on getting speeds under control where people are actually following the speed limit, we have some strategies for how to accomplish that. The first is to integrate more pedestrian crossings and traffic signals. The map on the bottom right shows the locations where there are existing traffic signals in green. Those are what the green dots represent. And the purple dots are locations where we're recommending additional traffic signals. So eventually, over time, getting to a point where instead of the spacing between those signals and those pedestrian crossings being about 1,000 feet, over time, as we add additional signals, we think we can get it to be about half, so that there's double the amount of pedestrian crossings along the corridor for people to cross from one side to the other safely. There's also an opportunity by installing traffic signals every block, similar to what you see in downtown or in some of the other districts in the city. There's an opportunity created by that to better regulate speed and traffic flow depending upon the time of day by coordinating all the traffic signals to operate in conjunction with each other. So it's a best practice for speed management and for traffic management, and that's that recommendation. The next recommendation related to public safety is looking at neighborhood traffic calming. Again, the Beta Bay corridor itself is important, and we want to focus on it, but it's also important that what we're doing on Beta Bay isn't being done at the expense of the surrounding neighborhood. So the neighborhood traffic calming strategies that we are recommending are here shown on the screen, but they include intersection murals, always stop control, looking at mini traffic circles inside the neighborhood along the residential streets, potentially raised intersections. Here on the top right is a photo of a raised intersection, which is essentially similar to a speed table or a speed bump, but it's more of a gentle technique because it covers the entire intersection, and it gets people to slow down at the actual conflict point itself and not at a random location along the road. And then another strategy for traffic calming is, of course, on-street parking as well. The next recommendation is to focus on bicycles. And emphasizing and formalizing safe routes for cyclists to access the district and also to travel through the district. And we're recommending the use of bicycle boulevards, which are very low impact, low cost facilities that are designated bicycle routes that tend to be lower speed residential streets. The streets that we're recommending are going to be Empedrado Street and Santiago Street as the bicycle boulevards that will get potentially additional pavement markings, additional signage, and some other safety elements to make those corridors more conducive to cyclists, so that they're not forced to use the Beta Bay corridor or the MacDill corridor. There are alternate routes and alternate ways to get around. Theme number 5 is urban parking management. There are 6 recommendations underneath this theme, and they're all very, very closely related to each other. So the image on the screen here is really an initial framework of what an urban parking management program might look like for the Palma Ceia Commercial District. It involves different types of parking solutions. So in purple, you'll see streets that we've identified that we're recommending for commercial parking, and that would be metered and or hourly parking restrictions. So paid parking through the existing systems that the city operates, as well as potentially unpaid but hourly restrictions. So 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour maximum parking, and then you have to move your vehicle. What that does is it allows the district to see more turnover in the parking spaces and actually be able to serve more customers and more patrons. We also would look to expand some of the existing on-street spaces where after they end on MacDill further north, so north of Barcelona, whereas right now the spaces on MacDill end at Barcelona, and there's a change in the cross section north of there. We would look at expanding another bank of on-street parking spaces north of Barcelona on MacDill. The second type of parking strategy we're recommending is a neighborhood parking permit program. This program, the city currently has in effect in some of the other areas of the city, and it's mainly in areas where we know that the neighborhoods are concerned with spillover from mixed-use districts or commercial districts. And so it's actually a provision in the city's code right now that neighborhoods can request to be admitted to the neighborhood residential parking permit program. And what that does is it establishes a limited duration for individuals to park on the street within the neighborhood, 2 hours, 3 hours, or potentially just during business hours. So, during the day, but at night, it's restricted to residents only. And that's a strategy that we've seen that can help to offset some of the struggles with spillover, people parking in the neighborhood in front of people's homes. And then the third strategy that we're recommending is off-peak parking on the actual Beta Bay corridor itself. So taking one of the lanes in one or both direction, and then outside of the rush hour period, so outside of the morning rush hour and the evening rush hour, allowing people to park in that lane along the curbside and based upon a time of day restriction. So you'd be able to park, let's say overnight, but you wouldn't be able to park during the morning rush. You'd have to move your car during that time. We currently don't have any off-peak parking areas of the city right now, but there are some other cities in Florida that utilize this strategy. Fort Lauderdale, Orlando utilizes it on certain roads, not everywhere, but certain roads that really have seen a benefit with it. Some of the other recommendations related to parking include expanding on-street parking to serve the commercial district. So there are some areas of the district that have roadside spaces where people are parking their vehicles that aren't designated. So we would look at those streets and improve them and actually designate the spaces and mark the spaces and manage and operate them as part of a formal program. But that's going to involve infrastructure improvements. You can see that the side of the road here, this is Granada Street behind the Tico substation. You can see that it's the road side's not even paved. And the image on the right is an example of just an improved area where we've formalized the on-street parking. And so we would look to to recommend something similar, where the roadside area is actually improved and it's an orderly, proper area for on-street parking. This is an example of some more infrastructure improvements that were done in a similar situation. This is over in the South Howard area near Howard Avenue, Deacle Avenue, and DeSoto Street, where we made capital improvements to the roadway, and we were able to actually fit more parking spaces on the side of the road than existed in the before condition on the left. So you can see here, if you drive up Howard Avenue today, this project is actually completed. So you can see the impact that it's had already. The other recommendation that we're making in terms of parking is to take a closer look at the on-site parking minimums that are required in the code. The code requires new development to provide a minimum amount of on-site parking or request a waiver in order to provide less than what's required by the code. The redevelopment projects that are minor, that just reuse an existing building, we see those are the projects that tend to get waivers or tend to be able to continue to operate. However, it's important to note that a lot of those older buildings, a lot of the existing commercial uses on Beta Bay and on McDill currently provide less than what's required in the code, which means that they're non-conforming. They're legally non-conforming, but they currently don't meet our code in terms of what's required for parking. So if the district is successful today with providing less than what the code requires, then perhaps that's something that should be looked at as a standard. And the benefit to that is that it creates more consistency and predictability, and it allows the market to actually drive how much surface parking is provided, rather than a number that that some might consider to be arbitrary or difficult to meet. And then just looking at some of the waivers, the parking waivers that the city has provided in the past, some of these have to be approved by city council. Some of them are approved at the administrative level, but about 50% of the parking waivers that the city has issued as of late were for mixed use projects, which is the type of development that we would expect to see along a main street like Beta Bay. And then the waiver amounts in terms of how much parking below what's required is actually approved when these waivers are issued. It ranges wildly from a 3% reduction to as much as almost an 80% reduction in the required parking. So again, if we're issuing a lot of waivers, then maybe we should take a look at the minimums to make sure that they still make sense as they currently stand. And this just shows you what the impact is of having an excessive amount of surface parking and what it does to the urban environment and the urban form. So that would be typically the massing of what where a building would be located. And so when you look at connectivity and consistency and a consistent built form throughout the district, having surface parking every other lot really breaks that identity up and is really degrading the ability of this area to achieve what the vision is. And then here is just a tabulation that we did of the blocks along Beta Bay from Hyde to McDill, and the blocks along McDill from Beta Bay to San Miguel. And the percentages on the screen show you on each side of the road what percent of that block is covered in surface parking. So you can see that some of the blocks are 100% surface parking, some are 65%, 20%, 40%, 50%. And then images of what those parking lots look like, they're on the left. Just to demonstrate that there is an abundance of surface parking. It's just the way that it's being used may not be the most efficient and may not be in the best interest of the vision for the district. Again, some final strategies related to parking management are to look at establishing what we call an in-lieu fee, which is essentially a way to allow developers to pay into a parking fund rather than actually providing the parking on site. And that fund is then used to improve the availability of public parking and also to manage and enforce the parking restrictions. We are also recommending promoting and incentivizing shared use parking agreements. These are agreements that are executed between multiple property owners to allow one business or entity to share parking with an existing business that has too much already. This is a mechanism that developers can use to meet their parking requirements. It's just not being used as widely as it could be. And so we'd like to promote and incentivize the use of that more, so that you have less empty parking spaces sitting out along the commercial corridors in the district. The next recommendation is a commercial district public parking assessment. This is another strategy that can be used in order to help develop a central parking facility. The images on the top part of the screen show 2 examples of public parking facilities. The top left is the Hyde Park Village garage that's vertically integrated above the commercial frontage there on Dakota. And then the image on the top right is of the central parking garage in Ybor City, which is a publicly owned and operated garage. And one of the mechanisms, again, to fund something like that would be through a public parking assessment, where you'd assess either the commercial property owners or a set geography within the district that are going to be using, that are going to be relying upon that facility. And then the last recommendation, which I mentioned earlier, is allowing on-street parking along Beta Bay itself outside of the rush hours where traffic is busiest. And then the 6th and final theme is land use and community design. This is an example. This is just on the screen. We're showing a example shot of Hyde Park Village here, which is mixed use. So all of the uses along the street at the ground level are active retail or restaurant uses. And then immediately above, people often forget that there is vertically integrated residential. So residential that's directly above the commercial development. You can see it there through the alley in the background there, the condo above the shop, and then you can see it here in the foreground above the Lululemon, the residential uses that are integrated there. And so that's what we mean when we say mixed use. So looking at these design recommendations for the future of the district and physically how it should look and redevelop, there are 4 key points that we want to emphasize. The first is that new buildings that are built should face the street, and new setbacks should be set in order to create more space for wider sidewalks. So we know a lot of the buildings today are built right at the back of the sidewalk, and the sidewalk is barely even 5 or 6 feet wide. So as new buildings come into play, we want them to still orient towards the street, but just provide a little bit more room so that there's space to widen those sidewalks and make them better for pedestrians and cyclists and everybody using the district. The second recommendation, the concept is related to on-site parking and where it's provided. So when a developer provides parking on-site, we believe it should be located either in the back of the building that they construct or along the sides of the buildings, just not in front, because the parking in front of the building is that condition that we're seeing along the corridor now, where everything along the street is surface parking, which isn't what we see as being consistent with the proposed vision statement. The third bullet point has to do with gentle density. So what this means is looking at that 2 to 3 level range, 2 to 3 story buildings with a mix of uses, just like we saw in the image there at Hyde Park, which was just a 2-story building. And then looking at what other residential uses could be used to complement that mixed use vision. So looking at single family attached or townhomes, especially along the back of that first block. So along Empedrado Street and along Santiago Street, facing the single family homes that are just outside of the commercial district. This is what the future land use and the zoning look like. Just very generally, the future land use is a high level designation that establishes what type of density and what type of land use intensity should occur within a specific parcel or a specific land use category. And then beneath that, we have zoning districts, and the future land uses are established by the city's comprehensive plan, and the actual zoning districts, which are more specific and more detailed, those are established in the city's land development code. The most common future land uses in the Palma Ceia commercial district are community mixed use 35 and community commercial 35. And the most prominent zoning districts in the Palma Ceia commercial district are commercial general and commercial intensive. And what you'll see here, you can see it in both slides, but everything that fronts the commercial corridor, for the most part, has one of those mixed use categories. But it only goes for half the block, for the first 100 feet to the north and the first 100 feet to the south. The back half of that first block is zoned either multifamily or single family detached residential, either the R20 or the R10 future land use, or the RM16 or RS50 zoning district. And I'm going to go into a little bit closer detail here so you can see what I'm talking about. So this dotted line here is Empedrado Street. So you can see that all the parcels that are on Empedrado that back up to Beta Bay are all zoned residential, and all the parcels that are along Beta Bay that back up to those parcels are all the CMU 35. And it's a similar condition on the McDill side as well. But the reason why we're bringing that up is because it creates a condition, which you can see here on the screen, where the first half of the block is commercial and the back half of the block is residential. Those commercial lots are difficult to redevelop, and the code actually requires a minimum commercial lot size of 100 by 100. So in order for a property to completely redevelop, you'd have to acquire 2 of the commercial lots on Beta Bay, which we think might also be a barrier that's discouraging redevelopment from occurring. So looking at some potential alternative configurations or some examples of how this has been dealt with recent development. This is an example of the townhomes that currently exist that were built within the last 10 years on Empedrado Street. And you can see the approach that they took was to take 3 residential lots, and they split those 3 lots into 5 single-family attached townhomes, with each lot being around 30 feet wide, but still 100 feet deep. And you can see here what that's done to the ability of people to park on the street. It's pretty much eliminated the ability to do that for the entire frontage of those 3 lots because of the spacing of those driveways. So what we want to know from you all, and this is going to be one of the questions in the survey, is this the type of development that you think is in line with the vision for Palma Ceia, especially that back lot? Because there's a couple of different ways that we've seen projects address that residential lot in the back. And that's really what we want to get some of your feedback on, is what is the best way to address that? Here's an example of a closer image of that townhome development. So another way that that's been addressed is through that first residential lot actually flipping and being absorbed by the commercial use. This has happened in a couple of different locations already. You can see there the Starbucks Plaza, the orthodontist office on the corner of Hyde and Beta Bay, and then there's a building next to that as well. And all 3 of those developments actually assembled additional lots along the back street. For Starbucks, they assembled some of the lots along Empedrado, and for the orthodontist office, they assembled some of the lots along Santiago and actually absorbed them, and were able to build a larger footprint for the commercial development. And so the question for this is then, is this the vision that we have consensus on that we want to see more of, or do you want to see a different type of form evolving in the future? Just to give you a sense of what this looks like from the back. So this is on the Santiago, the back street side of that. The orthodontist office is on the right, behind the foliage. It's obscured, so you can't really see it. And then the single family residential homes along the south side of Santiago there. And here's the similar image that shows the back side of that Starbucks plaza with the wall that was built, the green wall, and sidewalk and landscaping and trees. So another potential typology we looked at is the Hyde Park example. So if you look at Hyde Park Village is it's a mixed use development, but it actually can fit on a similar block structure compared to what we have on Beta Bay. Hyde Park is around a 200-foot deep block and the Palma Ceia district, the blocks in Palma Ceia are 200 feet deep as well. So looking at how we would accomplish a similar product to the Hyde Park Village example, how we would drop that into Palma Ceia and what inconsistencies there might be, how we might accomplish that. You can see that on the right side of the image, I've highlighted in red what constitutes a commercial use. So the Main Street sort of segment there fronting Dakota in dark red, and then the structured parking that's located on the interior of the block is in the lighter red shade. And then in orange, you can see the actual single-family attached residential townhomes that wrap the back of the Hyde Park Village development along Rome Avenue. And the bottom right image there shows you what that residential frontage looks like. I think it's nice because when you look at this, you don't realize that these townhomes are actually wrapping a parking garage and creating an active use along a frontage that would just be the back of a parking garage. So it's another way of approaching how to deal with the back of the commercial development and potentially what that would look like. Something to point out with this, however, is that this would require pushing that commercial use further outward towards the Empedrado or Santiago Street in order to accommodate the commercial use. You can see here on in the Hyde Park example, the majority of that block is actually commercial or structured parking. It's a very thin and small portion of it that's residential. But that's the portion that actually wraps and faces Rome Avenue is the residential portion. It's just the depth is much shallower than what the typical lot size is. The typical lot size is 100 feet deep, and these townhomes are less than 50 feet deep in the Hyde Park example. So again, another example of how to address redeveloping an entire block. This shows you the frontage of that Hyde Park example with multifamily residential and structured parking above ground floor retail. And then this is the backside of that, just showing how by being able to wrap the commercial development with multifamily, even multifamily that's not quite as deep as some of the townhomes that you all are seeing in Palma Ceia, even with the shallower depth type of a single family townhome product, you can still design it to be compatible with single family residential homes across the street. This is, again, this is an image of Rome Avenue just south of Swan. And there's a picture of those townhomes there. So another example, I believe this is the last one, is looking at the same strategy, however, incorporating a access alley. And what this does is it allows you to not have the proliferation of driveways along the residential street where every 30 feet you have a double car driveway, relocating that to the back. We know that in the Palma Ceia neighborhood, there is not an alley system like in much of the rest of the city. And so looking at ways to incrementally introduce a system like that over time, either publicly maintained alleys or privately maintained alleys, to provide access in the back and make sure that the street frontage itself is the highest quality and the most compatible with the residential uses that face it across the street. And then on the right, you can see an example of what type of residential product can fit on that smaller lot, providing access to parking and to the garage for those units in the back. This is obviously only going to be viable on a block when you have the side street to be able to access the alley. So this wouldn't be viable everywhere, but again, it's just another example of something that we might want to consider for Palma Ceia. And then here's an example of that townhome product, what it looks like. You can see that you don't actually physically see any of the driveways or the garages because all of that's provided in the back through that access alley. So very close to wrapping this up here, the remaining land use and design standards deal with a recommendation that we're making for sidewalk easements. So we know that the improving of the pedestrian and bicycle realm and of the roadside is going to take redevelopment over time incrementally. And so what we're recommending here is to include a provision in the code to allow redevelopment to actually provide that additional space. So an additional 5 feet or 10 feet, either through an easement or some other mechanism that would require that property owner then to widen the sidewalk at that location. This is incremental. It would only be done obviously when individual parcels are redeveloped, but over time, it would eventually lead to wider sidewalks, and it would begin to create a network that we can then fill in through other capital projects over time. So this is something that is currently in place that we require in Seminole Heights along Kennedy Boulevard, and so this would be a strategy we'd recommend for the Palma Ceia district. Then just kind of summarizing the issues that relate to that first block. So we're looking at smaller minimum lot sizes for the commercial parcels, not for the residential parcels, but for the commercial parcels. Revising and reducing the on-site parking minimums. We're looking at allowing for development to provide easements in order to widen the sidewalks along the corridors. Looking at how to reduce the rear setback and side setbacks along the commercial uses so that we can do things like wrap the back of the commercial with townhomes, like in the Hyde Park example. Looking at commercial uses being able to penetrate further into that residential lot, and establishing really a hard line to ensure that we're not going to see the commercial district encroaching further into the neighborhood, because that's something that we don't want to see. But just making that first block more conducive to redevelopment in a way that meets the vision that everyone has for the neighborhood in the future. And then the last issue that's related to land use and zoning is increasing the maximum intensity to enable vertical integration. So the Hyde Park style, you notice that it's a mixed use development, and the different uses are integrated into each other, like within the same building. So there's commercial use on the ground floor and residential above. In order to do that, you have to have the right amount of intensity to provide a building of that scale. And so we would look to make sure that the maximum intensities that are provided in the zoning along the corridor are in line with the future land use, and that they are allowing development to occur that we want to see, and that they're not hindering that. So looking a little bit closely, again, this is the last round of slides here, at what some potential projects might look like for that full block. This shows you a potential site that would assemble commercial buildings fronting bay to bay on the bottom of the screen. And then this shows a potential side street here on the left. And then on the top of the screen, you see there the sidewalk and the on-street parking along the back of the block that would be serving residential attached townhomes there. You see that the parking is actually hidden in the interior of the block, so you can't see it from any of the major streets. And there is ample space provided for solid waste and other types of uses that need to be dealt with for commercial development. And this is an example of how that looks. This is another Hyde Park example with commercial fronting Swan Avenue that's peeking out on the right side of the screen, and then the residential, a single-family residential neighborhood to the left, and then the parking lot that's provided that's behind the residential behind the commercial building, but serving the commercial uses. There's another iteration of that. It's very similar to the prior one, except it's a little bit more intense. Instead of it being 1 to 3 levels, this is mixed use 2 to 4 levels. And you can see that the upper levels are actually cantilevered over the parking in the back. So the parking is covered, and there is additional air-conditioned space above that parking area. And then here's an example of how that cantilevered parking might look. This is a location in West Tampa that is, again, the rear of the building that accommodates parking underneath it. There's just another angle of the same shot. Okay, so that concludes the overview of the proposed strategies and solutions. If you visit the project website. You can review the materials. We'll have the presentation from tonight posted within the next couple of days, so you'll be able to review this presentation in more detail, and then also complete the strategies and solutions survey, which will give us thumbs up, thumbs down, and a sense of what the feedback is on all of the recommendations that I've mentioned to you during this presentation. And just again, a reminder is that survey is going to close out on June 4th, so you have about a month to complete it and give us input on all these strategies. And with that, that concludes the presentation. And Randy, if you're still on the line, I can hand it back over to you if you like.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'll let you get a breather for that presentation, and thanks for running us through everything. There were a couple of questions that came in through the question box. Well, it was earlier when you were talking about parking, and you were showing the slides of the underutilized parking spaces. Shane Smith asked, have you seen Cappy's parking at night? So the question is, were you able to look at parking at night, and how would you respond? Would it change your response or your observations?
Yeah, we know that the district is the restaurants and the cafes are probably more active in the evenings, and so the parking lots that are empty during the day that serve those businesses, it's because they're being used at night. So that's why we would recommend, and that's why we did recommend looking at how to incentivize shared use parking agreements more, because let's say if you have a doctor's office next door to a restaurant that is mainly active at night, hypothetically, then those two uses can actually share the same parking. Some of the businesses on Bay to Bay, I believe there's at least a couple of shared use agreements that are active and in place. But for the most part, everyone's providing their own parking on site, and it's for some of the day it's being utilized, right? But throughout the entire day, it's empty for a majority of the day. So the question really becomes, how do we make sure that the parking that's being provided is being used the most efficiently, so that it's full a majority of the day and it's being used a majority of the day? And the other strategies that I presented earlier can help kind of chip away and accomplish that through shared use agreements and some of the other strategies. But I definitely acknowledge, yeah, there's the parking that's empty during the day may actually be utilized at night, and that's why it's still being provided and it's still being managed. Okay,
then see, Alma Murphy, you've had your hand up for a while. Were you just did you have a question, or has your hand just been raised by mistake? So you're unmuted if you do have a question. Okay, and we'll move on to the next question. The Adam Reith, I believe, he had a question. The walkability of the block south of Bay to Bay down to Grovewood is a huge need. There are more than 20 businesses inside Bayshore Plaza and Palma Ceia Village. Moreover, the high density residential areas frequently cross McDill in those areas. How will the unsafe conditions of the sidewalks and crossability of McDill just south of Bay to Bay be addressed? That's a little bit outside of the actual study area, but what would your response be?
Yeah, we know that's connectivity between these individual districts is really important. The connectivity kind of drops off at the natural barriers, and then the natural barrier, I think, to the south and to the east is the Selman Expressway and the CSX tracks. So the only way to get from Bayshore Gardens to Palma Ceia directly really is to walk along McDill. There isn't another way to get there. So that's a perfect example of where we would focus our efforts to enhance connectivity on those handful of routes that are the sole connection point between those two locations. So that's why from Bayshore to Palma Ceia, we'd focus on Santiago and Bay to Bay, because those are the two streets that connect. From Palma Ceia to Bayshore Gardens, we would focus on that McDill corridor, because that's your only connection point. It's just getting all the way south and into that that adjacent commercial district was just beyond the scope of this study. But I'd say as far as a key theme goes, that's definitely a key theme in that district, and we would probably recommend something similar there as well.
And we are able to take your audio questions or comments. If you're interested, just click on your digital hand and we'll be able to unmute you if you have a question that you'd like to ask. In the meantime, I do have a couple more that were typed in. How do you plan to gather feedback from the options that you're testing during the pilot period? For that, I believe that's the road diet, not the road diet, but the road plan.
Yeah, we would need to set up a robust feedback loop. So potentially through surveys or a hotline. Orlando, had a set program for getting feedback from people. The verbal feedback and the public feedback. But in addition to that, they also had a very robust program to monitor, any traffic backups or crashes that were to occur. So you really need both. You need the feedback loop with the public and also the right data, speed, traffic volume, delay, monitoring as well. And then that's how we would structure the pilot program to basically score and rank, which of the different options that we've tested work best. We would use the public input and also the data that we established from the get-go.
Okay, and another question. With the reduction in the depth of the lot for the residential area or residential side, say Emperado and Santiago, how will that be implemented over time, especially for current owners of single-family homes? How will their lots be reduced?
Yeah, we've been batting that idea around because we know that encroachment into the residential neighborhood is going to be a concern, obviously. And so there are a couple of different potential approaches. One could be that you still maintain that hard line of the first 100 feet are commercial, the second 100 feet are residential, and the zoning actually, the color of the zoning for those parcels would stay the same. But we would incorporate some type of a provision that would allow someone that's assembled both lots to be able to flex that commercial back a little bit further than what they normally would have been able to do. That would be a way to do it where you're not actually rezoning that second lot, which we know is might cause people to object or be concerned about that. So by creating a provision that allows somebody to flex, it really isolates it to the specific situation that we're trying to encourage, which is, what I presented. We wouldn't want that to be used for somebody to do something that the neighborhood wouldn't necessarily want. But we want to create flexibility to allow some different development types to come in that right now just can't do it because the regulations are too difficult. There are too many hoops to jump through. And the product that is being put out there isn't necessarily consistent with the vision that you all have told us that you want to see. So there are a couple of different ways you could try to blend it by allowing the commercial use to penetrate further into that second lot. But it's not a by right situation. It's something that would, you'd have to meet certain criteria that we would establish to make sure that they're doing it in the right way, the way that the community wants it to be done. Or, obviously the other way is to look at rezoning that second lot or rezoning both of the lots that constitute the first block to the north and the first block to the south to a completely different district than what they're zoned right now. So there are a couple of different options. Some change actually involve a rezoning and a map amendment, and other options would involve just a text amendment to the code to allow that additional flexibility. But we would like to know input on all of it if there's anything that raises eyebrows or that gives anybody some concern or pause.
Okay, another question. There's a lot of mention of increasing density of residential as part of enabling commercial redevelopment. What information have we studied about the existing capacity of the infrastructure, like stormwater collection impacts, water pressure, traffic, electrical availability, the internet, and so forth?
Yeah, so one of the Things that we're doing kind of in the background is updating or developing a vision for the entire city. And that involves taking a look at the population projections that we anticipate by 2045 and looking at the zoning and the future land use in the city to see where that growth could be accommodated. And then developing a vision for where people want to see growth, where they don't want to see growth, and then what kind of growth should occur. And I don't necessarily think that this area is going to be a high growth area. That's just not what the trends are saying in terms of the development activity, the permit activity. The historic population growth has not been very aggressive. But what we are seeing is demand. There is a lot of demand for housing in this area, and that's one of the reasons why Palma Ceia has some of the highest real estate and housing costs in the entire city and in the region as well. So we see that the demand is really outstripping the supply. So the more ways that we can incorporate other types of housing that don't necessarily require as much of a burden on the infrastructure, the better. It's important though to note that there is a difference between single family attached, single family detached, duplexes, triplexes. You've seen a lot of that development start to occur. And the reason why it's already occurring is that in many of the zoning districts along the corridor and also on that first lot in the back, it's actually already allowed. And that's something we have to keep in mind too, is what does the current zoning allow for and what does the current future land use allow for? In some cases, the current future land, the existing future land use category for the district is allowing a density that's much higher than what we heard through public feedback that people want to see. So we have to try to figure out how to balance that to make sure that the development that we're trying to encourage through whatever changes to the regulations that we recommend is not something that is going to hinder the existing property rights that people have, and that if it does, that we're doing it in the most appropriate way. In terms of not overburdening the infrastructure, again, the trends are not showing significant increases in population. So we're not seeing, like 10-story mid-rise buildings coming in, which are what you see in other areas of the city, like in Channel District and North Hyde Park, in the Tampa Heights area, in the West Shore area, in parts of the Inner Bay Peninsula, you're seeing that mid-rise residential product. That's not what we're recommending. So in Hyde Park Village, you'll see all of the residential that's incorporated there. It's at a much lower density than what you would see in like an apartment complex, some of the apartment complex buildings that are popping up throughout the city. So it's nowhere near that same scale or that same intensity, but it still provides different housing options to help fill the gap in what's currently available, which is majority single family detached.
Okay, I think that's the last question. So where we go from here is that as Stephen mentioned, we have the online survey where we want to get feedback from you on the specific recommendations. We'll be able to we can put this presentation online tomorrow on the webpage, so you'll have it as a resource. The video takes us about a week to get the video downloaded and posted on the website, so it'll probably be available next week. And then we want to take your feedback and incorporate it into the final draft of the plan and the final recommendations. We'd also like to be able to come out and we'd be happy to come out and meet with you personally, small groups in June, when we hope that maybe we're at a point where we can hold some meetings and live. We've been online for this entire process, and we just haven't had the opportunity to get out and really meet with you individually and personally. So we'd love the opportunity to be able to come out in June and present in small groups and get your personal feedback on any of the recommendations that are being considered. And so we hope to have the plan wrapped up by the end of June and published, and then we can begin working on monitoring and trying to move some of the recommendations forward. As many of you know, there's was no budget established in terms of implementation. So that's something in terms of we identify the costs for the implementation projects or the programs, and then begin working with the city administration and council on a long-term budget and funding program. So with that, I don't know if there's been any other questions that have come in. I didn't see any. There might have been one or two, but I don't see any. So with that, unless there's any other burning questions, I do see somebody raising their hand. Who is this? Is that Marty? Marty, Mary?
Hi.
I have my glasses on. Yes, Mary.
Yes, this is Mary Lee. I had a follow-on to the growth and capacity question. Will you be waiting for the outcome of the 2045 study and the eventual plan so that you can tie the Palma Ceia commercial district plan to that to align with those capacity questions? I get that you don't think that there'll be mid-rise coming in, but even a third story, one of the things we said early on in feedback was a second story, maybe a third story. We don't think we have the capacity on our roadways. We don't think we have the capacity in this tiny little space. And we don't want to look like Hyde Park. Hyde Park gave itself a gateway to that next step to becoming really commercialized. And I think that that's not where we want to take our property values. I know that there's our holding steady so far, but as you mentioned, the demand for our little area is pretty good. So are these tied together? Are we waiting for the 2045 plan?
So the 2045 is going to look at areas based upon the projections and where we're seeing growth occur and where we want to see more growth occur. What we're seeing based upon the population and employment looking historically in Palma Ceia is that the historic projections have gone off the chart, but in reality, what's actually been developed is much, much lower. And part of that is because the conditions to be able to redevelop are so difficult that it's just hard for people to redevelop. So even with the changes that we're recommending, I'm sorry?
So the question I have is that not part of the look and feel of this neighborhood? Not to inhibit modernization, but to inhibit a growth of multifamily or a growth of commercial over the feel of the neighborhood.
Right. So that is, I would say, yes, that's something that we're wanting to address. That we're not seeking to do that. The reason why we're showing that whole block scenario and the different strategies is that those project examples are projects that have been one-off projects where they've gone to city council, they've proposed something different than what the zoning says, and council has approved it. And it's all different models for how that's been done. So what we want to do is figure out which model does everybody agree they like the best. And if none of the ones that exist out there are looking good to you all, then that's fine too. But which ones do you like? Which are good examples? Because those are the ones that we'll try to change the regulations to encourage more of and discourage more of the ones that you don't like. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it's basically we're not proposing increases in density. We're proposing to stay on the trend with what the trend currently is, which is far below what the population projections show. So we're not gonna, that 2045 study is gonna show even higher than what you guys can even carry in this area. And we know that you're not gonna hit that high projection because it's just physically impossible. Like you said, it's too constrained as it is.
And we don't want to enable it. So it's in another document, maybe it was the email, I thought I saw that this was the final meeting being sponsored by the city.
Well, we had 3 planned. We do have the option of another large one. It just really depends on where we go. The last meeting was to present the plan. but we're also throwing out the option of having some smaller meetings where we can have a more intimate discussion as we wrap up the plan. So what we have now are the recommendations, the preliminary recommendations. Some are ideas that we're putting out that we want to get confirmation from the community and try to build a consensus. Those that have a high level of consensus will be easily integrated into the final plan. If we find there's still some divergency and opinions from the community, they may not make it into the final plan, or maybe they need to be refined. So the purpose of tonight's meeting was to get us to where we can draft a set of recommendations for the plan and try to wrap up the plan.
Okay. If you have not reached out to the Palma Ceia Neighborhood Association yet, we do have a fairly active neighborhood association, and we have invited speakers on the Solon Expressway extension, repeatedly different things. So Randy, we can connect on that, and I can get y'all connected if you don't already have that connection going.
We do have it, but we'd be more than happy to have some other assistance with it. We'd love to come out and speak with the residents.
Okay, cool. Let's talk offline.
Okay. So generally, I think we did hit all the questions. If anybody has any additional questions, our attendants are starting to leave, so I think that's a good indication that the meeting might be coming to a close. So our next steps again is we're going to this draft is going to be posted online. We're going to take some comments and feedback. We'll continue to have the dialogue, and we hope to have a consensus on some recommendations for the plan by the end of the month, and we'll be continuing to meet with you. The goal is to produce a final plan by the end of June so that we can get the plan complete and then move off into the next phase, which is the monitoring, management, and implementation phase. So if you have any questions, Stephen is available. His email is stephen.benson@tampagov.net. And thank you all very much for another night of joining us for the plan.
Thank you, guys.
Bye now.